Welcome to this explainer. You know, today we're going to completely shift the way you look at conflict. I mean, we've all been there, right? A conversation goes totally off the rails, tensions spike, and we're just left scratching our heads wondering, what on earth just went wrong? Well, we're going to explore the absolutely critical difference between a genuine communication mismatch and intentional manipulation. And we're going to do this by diving into the really fascinating Deru Kailo's system. Let's get right into it.
So is every argument just a misunderstanding? We often assume that if we just communicate better, if we just find the magic words and explain ourselves clearly enough, we can fix absolutely any conflict. It's a comforting thought, right? But let's test that theory, because the truth is, acting on the assumption that every single argument is just a simple misunderstanding, that can actually be incredibly counterproductive, and honestly, sometimes deeply unsafe.
Do not call harm misunderstanding. This powerful maxim from the Deru Kailo framework just shatters that old myth entirely. It serves as a really stark warning. Treating every painful interaction as a mere failure of interpretation, well, that can actually keep us in danger. The framework explicitly warns against using communication tools to erase conflict, excuse harm, or pressure people into this false sense of agreement. Bottom line, not everything is a misunderstanding. Sometimes the problem is something else entirely.
Let's start with Section 1, Mapping Good Faith Conflict. To truly understand when a conversation turns dangerous or manipulative, we first have to map out what healthy, productive conflict actually looks like. We need a baseline, right? So here is the master claim. In healthy dynamics, misunderstanding is very often just a layer mismatch. According to the framework, human communication operates across different layers: reality, perception, and meaning. And so much confusion begins when people argue as if they're making the exact same kind of claim. Think about it. One person is arguing facts, like literally what happened, while the other person is expressing their feelings about how it landed. They aren't actually disagreeing, they're just speaking from entirely different layers. It's like they're on completely different radio frequencies.
Now, the core spine of this entire system is pretty simple. Before defending, locate. Before you defend your position, you have to locate what kind of conversation you are actually in. Are you in the reality layer, arguing about, say, exactly what time an email was sent? Or are you in the perception layer, dealing with how that late email made your colleague feel? If you jump straight into defending your intentions before you've figured out the active layer, oh boy, that conflict is only going to escalate.
Which brings us to what good faith actually looks like in practice. Now, good faith absolutely does not mean you just automatically agree with the other person, and it definitely doesn't mean you just submit to their view. But it does mean you are genuinely trying to understand and repair the mismatch. You're willing to stay answerable to the truth, evidence, impact, responsibility, and boundaries. You actually care about the impact your actions had, even if your intentions were 100% pure.
And when a good faith actor realizes they've made a mistake, you'll often hear a quote like this: "I answered the wrong layer. Let me go back." This incredibly humble phrase is the ultimate signal of a good faith actor realizing, whoops, I responded to a literal word when you were actually sharing a symbolic impact. Actually, scratch that. It's more like realizing, I answered your impact with my intention. Think about how incredibly refreshing it is to hear someone say, let me go back. That requires some serious intellectual humility.
And that's because true repair in the Deru Kailo system requires a very specific action. Repair isn't just tossing out a quick, I'm sorry, or doing some big emotional apology. It means actively returning to the exact layer of reality, perception, or meaning that was missed. For instance, if you totally neglected the experiential layer, how something actually felt to the other person, you have to go back and acknowledge that impact before you can even think about moving forward.
That moves us into Section 2, the bad faith pivot.
So we have to ask a pretty critical question here. What happens when you use these exact, beautiful communication tools with someone who doesn't actually want clarity? What happens when this framework meets bad intent? Well, welcome to the dark side of conflict, bad faith. Bad faith might look like a normal conversation. It might even sound like a super sophisticated debate. But the goal is entirely different. The goal is not clarity. The goal is escape, control, exhaustion, dominance, or delay. A person acting in bad faith isn't genuinely trying to clarify, understand, repair, or tell the truth. They're just trying to protect themselves or maintain power over you.
In these scenarios, bad faith actors will literally turn this framework into a maze. They weaponize ambiguity. They'll use the language of a quote-unquote misunderstanding to constantly shift layers whenever accountability gets a little too close for comfort. You say, hey, that hurt me, and boom, they shift a layer to intention. Well, I didn't mean it. You provide a cold, hard fact, and they shift to context. Well, I was stressed.
It's like a game of whack-a-mole. They're just using the layers as places to hide.
Which leads right into Section 3, weaponizing the layers.
Let's look exactly at how bad actors weaponize these layers to avoid taking responsibility. Seeing this clearly is for sure the first step to protecting yourself from it. Look at this stark contrast. A good faith response says, "I hear that it hurt. Let me understand the impact." It acknowledges the impact first, holding space for the other person's reality. But a bad faith response, that sounds like, "I didn't mean it. You are taking it personally." It weaponizes intention to completely erase the impact. They use their supposedly good motive as a shield, basically telling you that your pain is invalid just because they didn't plan to cause it.
So here are the classic tactics of evasion mapped out. You've got using context as an excuse for repeated behavior, like, "Oh, you know how busy I've been," or using facts to deny obvious harm. They might use intention to erase impact or call obvious harm a mere misunderstanding. And of course, shifting layers to avoid accountability altogether. They might demand endless evidence they're never actually going to accept, turning a serious boundary violation into this exhausting intellectual debate. Basically, they're trying to analyze you right into giving up.
This brings us to Section 4, the ethical boundary.
And this is the absolute ethical limit of this entire system, because listen to me, this framework is not a tool to trap you in endless, toxic conversations. The core tenet here is that understanding an abuser does not obligate you to tolerate them. Here is the golden rule. Safety comes before interpretation. When physical safety, bodily autonomy, manipulation, or direct harm are involved, protection comes first. Full stop. The conversation must end. You absolutely do not need to figure out the active layer of a conflict if the person across from you is actively trying to harm or exploit you. No way.
So, what do we do with all this? Well, here is the strongest operating system for navigating conflict. These are your actionable steps. You pause, you locate, you separate, you respond, and finally, you either repair or bound. Let's break down that Deru Kailo discipline. 1. Pause before reacting. 2. Locate the active layer. 3. Separate facts, feelings, and meanings. 4. Respond to the actual layer. And 5. Notice that final, absolutely critical step, repair or bound. It is not just repair. If you encounter good faith, yes, you repair. But if you encounter harm, danger, bad faith, or a repeated violation, your job is no longer to repair the misunderstanding. Your responsible next step is to set a firm boundary. That might mean physical distance, it might mean documentation, or it might just mean a complete refusal to engage any further.
And that brings us to the ultimate ethic of the entire framework, coherence without control. What does that mean? It means we seek to clarify our reality, to understand perception, and to make sense of meaning. But we do all of this without trying to dominate or force agreement from the other person. We can understand each other perfectly and still walk away with a very real disagreement. And you know what? That is completely okay.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider about the recurring conflicts in your own life. In your hardest conversations, are you genuinely trying to repair a misunderstanding, or are you analyzing yourself into staying unsafe? Are you tirelessly working to translate your feelings for someone who is just using bad faith to dodge accountability? Remember, not every conflict is a failure of communication. Sometimes it is literally just a boundary waiting to be set. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helps you navigate your next difficult conversation with a lot more clarity and confidence. Take care.
Want to learn more? Explore the full framework in reality, perception, and meaning. Available now at derukailo.com and on Amazon Kindle.